You kicked off with a statement. I thought last night's session was brilliant. You kicked off with a statement last night along the lines of, if there is ever a time when the dreamers need to come forth again, it is now. In your vast ministry experience, I just wonder if you can talk for a minute about the season that you think we're in Australia, and why it is so important that we dream again, and I guess the opportunities that we have in this season.
Well, I'm looking at you blankly.
I'm waiting for the slap.
Look, this is my personal opinion, but I don't know how to put this. If I was to be very blunt about where I see the church, I think there are pockets in Australia where God is obviously doing something incredibly special. Yep. You cannot look at Hillsong and not think that God is not doing something amazing. I do not even understand it, but man, I'm praying for it. Do you know what I mean? I will never criticise what God is doing in any manner or form. I'm for it. But can I say this, that I think that there is an opposition against the church. You see it on programs like Q&A. You see it all around the place, where we don't seem to have the credibility that we used to 20 or 30 years ago. We don't have the entry points that we had 20 or 30 years ago. So my heart is that how do we regain that credibility in our community? How do we regain the credibility where if there's an issue, the church is the problem solver. The church is the need meter. The church is that. And I haven't got an answer to that, but I'm working on it. But I just think if there's ever a time when people are frustrated with government, they're frustrated with the education system, they're frustrated with a whole lot of things, there seems to be this hostility about most things, then isn't this the time where the church rises? And I would love us as a church to really start to think about how we can do that more effectively. That's my view. Can I just say this, Carl, and I don't want to take the time, is that the politicians that I talk to, they say that at the last election, they have never seen hostility like it. Wow. They are saying that they often would have meetings like this, where people would be invited and they could come and ask any questions they wanted to. They would have no one turning up. At the last election, they would have halls full, and they would just be abused for 2 or 3 hours. There's a frustration out there, and I just wonder how we as a church can get and say, we've got the answer. The gospel actually works. All right? The gospel actually works. So that's my gut feeling, but I haven't got an answer to it.
Yeah, good.
Now's the time.
Yeah, and I loved, because we all sense it together, but I loved your point that it is time to dream. Maybe there's an opportunity in all of this to dream again. Yep. And God it's not a surprise to God, you know.
That's right.
So He's leading us forward. Yeah. You linked our ability to dream to our own self-concept. Yeah. You know, God spoke to Gideon. We all identify again with those foyer conversations and the discouragements we get. I was talking outside just earlier, a discouragement I got on Monday of this week. Yeah. Practically, how do you keep that image, God's image of you, how do you keep that high in your life as you face the discouragement?
I think there's a number of practical things that I've learnt, and Philip has certainly helped me over these years. The first thing is, can I say this? Hold people lightly. Yep. Hold people lightly. Okay, they're not yours. And that was a lesson that I really had to come to terms with. I actually thought that I owned them. So therefore, when something happens and they actually treat you inappropriately or leave the church, and they will, can I tell you that? I think that the loyalty to churches is wavering generally at the moment. So I'm saying, first of all, I hold people lightly. That's the thing. Second thing, I realise that when people talk to me, this will sound terrible, but you'll understand. So when I go to the foyer, I understand that some people are going to get flustered when they talk to me. Right. And they're going to say things that they actually don't mean. They really are. And they're just trying to connect. But they'll say silly things. So I just relax about that. I just really relax in the sense that not everyone wants to come up and knife me in the stomach. They're just feeling nervous about having a conversation. That's all they're doing. The third thing is, Carl, I look at the person who's making the criticism. And I don't think every criticism's wrong. I actually think criticism is healthy. Now, we've got to talk about the way we do that song. So I just look generally about who's actually giving that criticism and is there some truth to it. And I've learned a lot from the criticism over the years. And the last thing is that I don't take myself too seriously when I'm in that foyer. You know, I realise that there are some things going to be said that I'm not going to agree with, and it's not the foyer to have that confrontational time. So I just relax a bit about it. I really do. I just relax about how people treat me, what they say, and I have good friends that will point out those things that I do need to change about.
Excellent advice. Changing tack. Thought your last session was excellent on not just how we should be credible as leaders, but how we identify leaders.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, there's some great keys there. And you made a statement last night as well about you can tell a leader by, or it might have been this morning, by how they go in the tough times.
Yeah.
How do you discern then, as you're watching leaders and you're hoping that they grow up into that next level of leadership? How do you discern, or just that they grow up? How do you discern they're not going to make it, and gently I need to move them sideways or somewhere else, as opposed to I need to put more input into them, or they're just making mistakes? Hard question, maybe.
Yeah, look, I think it is a hard question. I think it's a question that should have probably 2 hours on it, right, to be honest. But very briefly, the first thing is that I'm an optimist. Yep. I'm not going to give up on people, because I don't think Jesus gave up on people. I would have written Peter off. Seriously, we were putting before. I wouldn't have even given him a blue card, that boy. I'm telling you, seriously. So I'm encouraged by the fact that I'm not going to give up on people easily. So my first port of call is, what am I doing in their life to improve their leadership skills? And I separate that in 2 parts. The first thing is, if there is an integrity issue, you know what? I've got bells ringing everywhere. I've not discovered too many leaders that rise to a position where I can use them where there's integrity issues. I've not been able to change them. Now, I know that's a broad statement. Please hear my heart. But there's got to be something. They've got to address that. They've got to do it before God. I can confront them, but gee, it's tough. Yeah. But the other hand, I think we can build skills. Okay. So I'm a real optimist about that. So I'll set them tasks. I'll watch them. I'll ask them. I'll say to them this, Carl, and this is a big statement to make. I actually say, would you allow me to speak into their life? Yeah, and do you know what they say? Yeah. And I say, no, you don't. Seriously, they don't want me to speak into their life. So I come back and I say, now, do you know what this means? That means that I'm going to offend you and you're going to get upset. What's going to happen at that point in time? So I have this conversation in advance. And then I really do watch them and I set them. And then after a period of time, I'll know. But because I've built up that credibility all the way through, do you know what I'm trusting is going to happen? They're going to recognise that they haven't got the capacity to do the job that they're looking at. And most times that happens. If I put that hard yards into it. Most times it happens. Okay.
So that's on skills, and I heard what you said about integrity, but do you go there at all with integrity?
And absolutely.
How do you, because that's the hard one, isn't it? How do you work your way into that conversation?
Pretty directly. Right. No, I'll be honest. I used to not do that, but honestly, Carl, I just find that I think age helps. Yeah. I really do. I think age helps. Yeah. But I can go there pretty easily because it's such a debilitating area of one's life. Yeah. You know, you don't get too many chances on that area. You can make mistakes in terms of competency mistakes, but integrity mistakes, you can't make a lot of those. So I go in, I really do address it. Not publicly, but privately. Yeah. And I'm pretty hard on that. Okay. And I've got people that do the same thing for me.
Yeah. I find one of the greatest areas of disappointment is the leader that you've been working on and building in for years and you're investing in, and then they fall over seemingly right towards the end. Yep. Do you feel that as well, and how do you deal with that sense of loss?
You feel terrible. Right. You feel. I mean, you've got to remember, everyone in this room, they're here because they've got a call of God in their life. What to do? To be with people. We love people. Yeah. We're shepherds. Are you hearing that? We're shepherds. Yeah. We hurt when people don't make it. We hurt when they grieve. We hurt when they're hurt. So, Carl, when that happens, I hate that happening. Yeah. And I feel personally responsible. But sometimes it does. And I rationalise it by simply this viewpoint. It happened in the Bible. It happened to great leaders. And it's going to happen to us. Yeah. It is going to happen. Good. So I've just got to realise not everyone is going to make it. It's just not everyone's going to make it.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent advice.
It still hurts.
Yep. Changing tack again. You talked this morning and sort of last night about recognising moments. So God is doing something at the moment. I loved your thought about when we get a dream again and God's recovering a dream, he still walks us through a process like he did with Gideon. Yep. How do you recognise that's God as opposed to maybe we got lucky and that's, things are going well there or maybe, the concept of laying down a fleece. How do you work through that process of saying, this is really God at the moment, what's working in our church, that opportunity?
Oh, look, I think it's a great question. I think there's so many answers. I think it's either Colossians 2 or Colossians 3:15, where it talks, the umpire of your decision is the peace of God in your heart. Right. I base a lot on that these days, plus experience. I just tend to watch things, watch people, and I just know that you understand. You know that you know that you know because of that peace in your heart that there's a God element about this. And that's when you've got to take that step of faith. You've got to take a step of faith. Ultimately, we are a people that operate in faith. We can't please God without faith. And so ultimately, no matter what you've got, you've seeking good advice, you've done all that, but ultimately then you've got to say, I've got to take this step that this is a God moment. And that's what ministry is all about.
And how much time would you spend watching out in your ministry areas for those God moments and then moving in that direction?
All the time. Okay. More time now than I've ever done before. Right. I'm looking for them in our services more now. I'm looking at when I preach now. Just those moments. I joke about the Saturday night specials, but I want my preaching to be mixed with great preparation, but Holy Ghost moments.
Yeah, good.
Where I just know God's speaking. I just know it. Yeah. And I've got flexibility because I've done the preparation to do that. Yeah. So I'm looking at it in services. I'm looking at it in people's lives. Yeah. I'm looking at it community activities. I'm looking at it in those moments when I meet with people. I'm trying to find those God moments. Okay. Because here's why. I found they're easier when you step into them. Rather than the hard slog of trying to push something that's just... You know what that's like? You've been there. You're like riding a bicycle that's chained to something. But those God moments, it's almost like surfing that wave. So I'm looking for those moments all the time. Okay. The flip side is, you said some things you've got to stop. Yeah, absolutely. See that you need to stop those things. Yeah. Practically for us, you see a ministry and you've got to stop it. How would you walk through that with somebody who's poured their life into that ministry? Yep. How do you say to them, I'm sorry, we're stopping that? Well, I think you're going to be in trouble. I think you're just going to be in trouble. I'll tell. See, I'm talking about when someone... There's two instances. When someone comes to you and says, look, I'm thinking about starting this ministry, that's when you strike. But the majority of people here, and I can tell you because I've done it, they'll say, why don't we explore that a bit more? You've not said we're going to explore that more. You've said, we're going to do that. So automatically, you are setting that person up for disappointment. So it's better to be right honest, right at that moment. Now, I'm not talking about in the foyer. You might have to say, come on, we'll meet about that. But that's the time that you've got to outline why you're not going to do it. Yeah. Now, the other example is going to end up badly no matter what you do. Very rarely that it doesn't. Because that person's lived that ministry. They've had your blessing for the last 10 years. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you say, no, we're going to stop that. That's going to end really well. That's not going to end well in a month of Sundays. Yeah. So I don't know how you do that one. You've got to work with that person right along the way in some way saying, that's not our vision. Yeah. That won't end well. Okay. Won't end well. That's honesty right there, isn't it? But I could be wrong. But I love that. I don't think so.
the expression, or I hope we get what Mark is saying there. This is what it is as leaders. This is who we are as leaders. We've got to be that person that looks at people and ends things. So I appreciate that.
Well, it's not. It's not the end, Carl. It's not the end thing. Is we've got to be careful about that. It's more the starting of things that aren't in our heart.
Yeah.
Because what happens is we appear like we're being dictators, but we're not. Because if you don't have it in your heart and it's not the vision of the house, you're never going to give it the attention anyway.
Yeah.
And the person leading it is going to feel that, and that's going to create tension anyway. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty.
Yeah.
So I've learnt that I've got to have those hard conversations first up. Because as I also said, you've also got to have entrepreneurial leaders in your church.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that, oh man, they want to start everything every minute of the day. They want to start something.
Yeah, yeah. It's good. Just slap them, I say.
Don't do that.
Not all of them.
I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. I knew it. I know. We'll have to have a coffee so you can counsel me on that.
I'll ask one more question, but I'll open it up for a question or two in a second. So if you've got a question, be thinking. Mistakes that you've made. That's a great point. And, we all know we learn from our mistakes, but we can beat ourselves up along the way pretty bad. How have you learnt to pick yourself up from mistakes that when you really are honest, you've made them and I've made them? How do you pick yourself up?
Oh dear, I don't know. I'm hoping, to be honest, I'm making less mistakes now than I did 10 years ago. Yeah. So, we talk as a culture in our team of having mistake-free zones, because I'm trying to get the team to actually make lesser mistakes by being more prepared. I think preparation can reduce the mistakes you make. I find that the mistakes that I make the most of are those spontaneous comments that I've gone one step too far. I'm trying to be nice, or I'm trying to be funny, or and I go one step too far. And then I've just got to crawl off the platform, go and have a serious coffee with myself, beat myself up for a while and say, look, I've just got to do better. How did this happen? Was it a hurt? How did I manage to say that? That's what I've got to do. And then I've just got to get back on the horse, to be honest, Carl. I can't let that determine my ministry. I've got to get back on the horse.
I loved your point about just remind God of the promises that He's made to you and let that speak to you as well. Okay, so we've got time for maybe a question or two over here with David. Claire, great.
Mark, when you were talking about the integrity, dealing with an integrity issue, you said age really helps.
Age?
You said age really helps, and that's great. But for those of us who don't yet have age on our side, what advice would you...
It's a great question. It really is a great question. Well, it is a really, really good question. But here's what I'm trying to make the point is that I think that sometimes we can jump on people for doing the wrong thing, and we call it integrity when it's just a mistake. It's just immaturity. Okay? So in those cases, age doesn't matter. It's just an immature decision. When there is an integrity decision that you've got to talk about, all I'm saying is it helps to be a dad, but it doesn't mean that I would not confront it anyway. It's how you confront it. So I try to look at it and say, look, rather saying that person's a bad person, that could be just immature. So I make that distinction. But there are some issues, integrity-wise, that I think are pointing to a pattern that I need to address. Does that make sense? I can't tell you what they are off the top of my head, but, inappropriate. If I see a pattern of inappropriate behaviour, I'm going to jump on that. Whereas one instance, I might just think, just immaturity, just a bad decision. But if there's a pattern, I'm onto it. Because the pattern will eventually lead to something. It's going to lead to a cliff fall. And I don't care what age I would be, I would address that. It's the way I address it would probably be different now that I've got age. Can I give you an example? I can come up to a young guy in the life of the church and say, look, mate, I've noticed this when you're talking or when you're doing this with, you know what I'm trying to say? I can get away with it. You probably can't, to be honest, but I can.
That's good. Somebody else, Eugene.
Mark, you mentioned several times your connection with Philip over the years. How do you inspire other leaders to make that connection? Because integrity really depends on having a close relationship with someone else, apart from your spouse.
Eugene, I demand it. I know that'll be a terrible thing to say, but I don't leave that to a voluntary decision by my team. I just don't do it because they won't do it. So one of the things I talk about with the senior people in my team, and I'm not talking about age, I'm talking about they hold senior positions. So I'm talking to them about the people in their world that they talk to the point where if you're in a senior position in our church, that's a paid position, and please hear what I'm saying there, we pay for them to get counselling with an appropriate person throughout the year. So in addition to myself, I have 2 other staff members that we pay for as a church to seek counselling on a regular basis.
You mean counselling or mentoring?
Counselling, all right? Mentoring will primarily come from me, won't it really? But I'm also very strong on the fact, say for example, my youth pastor. I will challenge him and I'll say, what other youth pastors are you talking to? Go out there and find it. My associate pastor, Craig, I'm saying, Craig, go and find another associate pastor. Go and talk to them. So I'm on to them about that all the time. I'm not going to leave that to a voluntary, accidental encounter. I'm going to talk about that.
Brilliant. Well, I think, again, you've just reinforced, Mark, great teaching for us. So, again, thank you. I think this is the final time we're saying goodbye to Mark, but I'm going to hand over to Dad, who's going to say some kind words, I'm sure.